sent in. The results were analyzed on December 7th, was the first analytical meeting to study the feasibility study. And the presentation planning team and the ministry board has met a couple times since then. And then we developed a small group to develop the informational meeting. And the congregational vote, it will wrap up a go, no-go on February 11th. 83 of 164 households participated in the feasibility study. Pretty much 50%. According to Hal, anything above 50% is astronomical. We should be proud of ourselves that you guys as a congregation, and we care about the congregation and what's going on in it. A little bit of demographics, how long the membership range. You can see 1 to 5 years, obviously less than a year is going to be 6%. 1 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, 11 to 13 years. It's pretty even across the board. The 1 to 5 years being 40%, almost just short of 40%. That's great. That shows that the new members are taking ownership of the church and want a voice to be heard. Factors of what brought people to peace and what caused them to join peace. Welcoming left ELCA, their charter members, Pastor David and Mark. The belief system and the youth program, you can see the demographic kind of across the board. With being welcoming and friendly is number one. Describes age. Now, nobody likes to be honest about their age, but you can see that it's pretty even across the board. So it's not just old people who care, there's not just young people who voice their opinion. It's pretty even all the way across the spectrum. Hal brought us the Wheel of Progress. I think everybody's seen this in the Hal Johnson meetings and in the surveys and everything. The research and develop, we started to prepare the document, that's been completed, invite supports for objectives and the feedback. We are right down here, right down at the 6 o'clock position. The next steps is the final vote. Anybody have any questions or comments during?
Yeah, you were saying that the capital campaign could go 1 to 3 years, or is it 3 years, or is it that if it gets, we do so well and we can raise the 1.5 million or whatever, you know, after a year and a half, say, okay, let's get the ball rolling, or do we wait until that time period is done?
So is it, your question, I gotta repeat the questions because we're streaming this. The question is it set and defined at a 1 to 3 year capital campaign? That would depend on what comes forth initially. Nothing is set in stone. Right now, nothing, there is not plans set for a term. Usually they go 1 to 3 years, and that would depend on if we get enough up front and we have enough faith promises above and beyond the normal general fund to keep the doors open. We could, that team that is working with Hal to do can make a recommendation, and we can look at financing possibly for a short term or borrowing money from people in the congregation if they have the means and everything like that. I know there is a donor that is willing to match up to $600,000 out there. So that is in the first year of giving. So that, it all depends on what comes forth the first year and then what is dedicated over the next 3 years. So if we have enough to get started to run that, then we can look at different options so we can start earlier. But that's going to be kind of that shell game to figure out and not leverage the church so that if the funds, by no means if we have 1.6 promised to us, that's not meaning that we're going out. I would recommend going out and spending 1.6 on a project, because if something happens, we have to protect the church. If something happens that people can't perform their promises that they made, we don't want to over leverage and have a half-done facility. So, and that would be considered in those other 2 steps of when, or the second vote to be determined at a later date. The second part of that vote, that would be, are we comfortable with what we've raised? Should we start getting bids and going? So there's nothing set in stone, there's no concrete. Hal's contract that he proposed is for a 3-year term, which most of it is in the beginning of the year, and then the other 3 years is tracking to make sure that people are actually meeting their promise. John?
Mike, what is Hal Johnson's fees? I remember we were doing the feasibility study. If he's the guy to come in and do this for us, was it true that the beginning gifts, if they come in, he can't get a percentage of that? Is that how that works?
Hal, so the question is, what is Hal Johnson's fee structure? The fee structure that he's proposing is a flat rate of $28,750.
Okay.
Now, what that's percentage depends on how much we raise. That's based off of, number one, he's not basing his percentage off of what's already in the building for the future fund, or there's one large gift that was not promised, but conveyed in the individual interviews. He was taking that out of it too. But it's a flat rate. I mean, if we raise $1.5 million, that comes to 1.9%.
Okay.
Mike, when is Hal gonna start, and what role is he gonna play, and congregational members gonna play, and when will this finance drive be completed?
The finance drive is basically completed when we bring it to the congregation to bring it to the vote. Now, the main focus of Hal's part would be in the first 6 to 8 months. He would be working with a small team of members. He would be driving everything. He would be doing the literature. He would be doing the interviews and stuff like that. It's focused on the first 90 days to hit the ground running, to hold the interviews, to try to get those early promises so that we can pretty much determine what we're going to have, or what we can kind of get a really good gauge on the upfront faith promises. After that, it's the monitoring of how everybody is doing. So it would be Hal's kind of plan, just like what the presentation planning team went through. It's, they're putting the input on how to best deliver it to the congregation, how to best handle everything. And he's got his prototype on how to run it.
So this team will interview the members of our congregation, correct?
Hal and Katie would be taking in faith promises, and he's got a list of people that the congregation has said to talk to. That's not necessarily means that they are the people to talk to, but these are the people in the congregation, that the congregation through the written surveys has said would be the larger donors. He would show them the respect on, one-on-one and talk with them and explain everything to them. Not knowing exactly what Hal's is, I'm just going off of what I believe is going to happen. Pre-campaign and capital campaign services, the duration, so not getting into it with the beliefs that volunteerism is so hard to come up with in this church. And Hal's already got a system down that's tried and true and going. That's why we're recommending at this time, if people don't think Hal should be involved, please voice your opinion, But it's believed that with his system and everything, that 1.9% is a pretty cheap prototype. It'd be made up more than that. We don't want members putting other members on the spot type of thing. Our own members, just like in the presentation planning team with the individual interviews there, our own members didn't sit in those interviews. It was a one-on-one with HJA and the people.
I just have a comment on that. The last church I was at did a capital campaign without like a professional service from the outside, and it was okay, but I do think that's a very reasonable fee as far as like what you said, to have someone who has a system in place versus us trying to do it on our own who've never done this before. Having a professional who's done this hundreds of times and helped a lot of churches, I think having seen it on the other side, I think that this is
we have done this before. We have done it before as a congregation. And we have wonderful, very intelligent members here. I think we need to look at this both ways, and we know we have talent in this church. Are we truly taking advantage of that and spending our money wisely? That's my concern.
I don't argue, but Hal specifically asked in the interviews when he was asking about all of this, who would be willing to step forward and help with the capital campaign? And how many interviews do you do one-on-one?
Well, with the surveys and with the interviews, there's 35 one-on-one
I think there was
interviews.
46 people that said that they would help.
That, and here's the question.
Two,
That
I'm
was
sorry.
that was the pig talk. You guys are gonna talk through.
Well, that was through the interviews, too, the mail-in surveys
Of all the
and
people that
everything.
attended the 4 different meetings, he interviewed all those 83 people that went forward. So out of all that group, whether it was one-to-one or they sent in their response, there was virtually no volunteerism. So I understand what you're saying, and I know it's been done before since I was very last month.
I saw that. Kathy?
Yeah, and I agree with what Karen said. I think it would be awkward for a congregation to interview congregation members. And also, this past year, nominating had difficulty getting people to run for ministry board and for nominating. And even though our congregation has grown, volunteerism is growing.
And that's basically what we talked about, kind of presentation, planning meetings and everything else. Yeah, to not take away from the volunteerism over the next 3 years during this campaign. And the proposal just comes from the percentages from the feasibility study. It's not our decision, as a ministry board or as a presentation planning team. We have to listen to what the congregation said in the feasibility study. And everybody's input is welcome, and that's what makes up the feasibility study. But everything is in those books, the percentages and individual comments and everything are labeled. Anything else?
Is the 28,000, is that he's proposing as a flat rate, is that fixed, say, okay, you say you got a $600,000 match in there, but say you get 300,000 committed from the congregation besides the 600,000, but he's only gonna give 300,000, so that's 600,000, so you're not gonna be able to do much of a building project, but does he still get the $28,000 fee, or does it get cut back to?
The question is, if we don't raise the funds that we are going for, does that rate change? It's a flat fixed rate. That's the fee. If we raise $30,000 in the capital campaign, most of it's going to Hale Johnson. So the better we do in the congregation, and that would be a supreme letdown. I mean, we've already got more than that in the building for the future fund already. But that percentage goes up and down. That's based on the 1.5 to 1.2 million dollars that we're hoping, just to get this section going, some sort of this expansion.
I'd just like to kind of piggyback on that. Hal Johnson's done this for 50 years with an experience of 323 clients. And I know in here it says how much money they've raised, and he's had a very great success rate. So Charlie, he is a really good guy. He does a fantastic job. At least I think he does.
I'm not questioning that. My question is, okay, the 28,000, okay, what do we have in the building fund that's gonna impact our building fund if it flops? Or, I guess that's my question, that the 28,000, that's a big chunk of change. That
It is, but you gotta take a leap of faith also, and you gotta say, look, God, we know this is our plan, help us out, we gotta pray about it.
Well, again,
And-
I go back to the guy that's in the flood on the roof of his house, and the rowboat comes along and he doesn't take that, and the helicopter comes along and doesn't take that, and he drowns.
Sure.
God, he says, God, I prayed to you, why didn't you come and help me? And he says, well, I sent you a rowboat, I sent you a helicopter.
Well, he's not a very smart man either, that
So
is.
I'm just saying that it is a big chunk for a congregation our size, that,
But it is a big chunk, but it's a chunk that's very feasible. And like Mike was just explaining, if you raise the 1.5, which I think is very doable,
okay.
you're 1.5%, isn't that what you said?
Yeah, it's at 1.9.
Okay.
I'm just,
Andy, did you have one?
I did. Actually, your question brought up another question for me. I thought it was a percentage on what he raised. I thought it was 1.8% of what, so if we already got $600,000 by a very generous donor,
No, that's not.
he's not taking that into account. So if we raise as a congregation another $1 million in 1.9%, $19,000, isn't that's not the way it works. It's 28,000 no matter.
It would be a flat fee no matter what we raise, no matter, if we raise $5 million, which would be awesome, if anybody has lottery tickets, you know, which would be awesome, it's still 28,750.
Okay. So the question I had, I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things when we started, I don't know how many of us thought about the idea. I think a lot of us thought we were going to stay with one service. Now that I see more and more data leading more to the idea of two services, what is it? Is that a ministry board? Is that a congregational vote that says we're going to go to two services? And if we approve that, or however that works, does that change the way we think about the addition and all the possibilities that we have because we go to two services versus one service, the sanctuary, the entryway, does that change the way we think of those things? I kind of got two questions.
Yeah,
First question was a matter of how do we go to two services? Is that a congregational vote, or is that a ministry board thing, or how does that work?
I think that is with this vote going forward, that is an understanding that in reading the feasibility study that we will be going to two services at some point in the future. That's basically an understanding.
So then, does that then change our minds of what is needed if we're going to two services? You know what I mean? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Does the sanctuary need to grow as big as it is if we're going to two services? Do we need to change the front entryway if we're going to two services?
That would be up to, so the renderings aren't saying that this is what we're doing.
Right.
So that would be a rendering of, we do the capital campaign, and we see what's going on. If we don't need to change the financial way, then that means we could possibly do more here. That would be part of that group that puts that together and does what we can do. So, without saying yes, it's not really a yes or no question, it's kind of a,
Yeah,
it's a, that is dependent on how much money we raise and what the group that works with Norson or whoever to get bids and everything, to kind of change those renderings to what we can afford. Does that clarify a little bit?
yeah, no, I
It's
think
not-
just it changes the way that I think of in terms of what is needed on this end, because what's not needed on this end for
Mhm.
however many years. So hopefully everybody else is thinking that same way, that this is actually probably potentially a smaller project, because we don't need to change as much on that side of the building.
It could be, and in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to worry about it. We just do it all the time. But it's hard to give an answer like that and dedicate to tell the congregation this is exactly what we're doing before we know what we can afford to do. So I can't like give you a definite yes or no,
Yeah.
because that would be part of the second vote is, okay, have we raised enough to start something? And then before the third vote, that would be the group of people that works with Northside, kind of what, in this expansion, I think they were called the I-Team. I think you were part of it, Norm, and stuff, and John was part of that and everything. I think they were called the I-Team. That would be sort of the I-Team working with who we decide to go with for here, which is leaning towards Northside. They would put together a set of renderings to say this is what we feel we need to go forward. And then the congregation would vote. You know,
Yeah.
so then the minister board would put together the meeting with that team and put forth another proposal for a third vote. So at every step of the way, the congregation has the say. It's about as transparent as we could possibly make it, so that it's not us making the decision. It's not the presentation planning team making the decision. It's not solely the I team making the decision. It's the entire congregation coming together and voting on, let's move forward, or we're not ready yet.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's important that as a congregation, however it's determined between one or two services, if the congregation comes back and says, we all want one service, well, that changes the way the plan should read. If we came back and said, no, we're okay with two services, again, that changes, and it even may change what Hell's fee is, because we need to raise less money to do what we need to do. That's my point.
Well, we're going, because that's how we got here, is we listened to the feasibility study. So we've already kind of come to what, if the congregation totally changes their mind after the feasibility study, and we only can go off of the means that we have, and it's pretty one-sided with the feasibility study and looking at the statistics in that the majority of the congregation, although we don't, the majority of the congregation isn't happy about it, but we can see that there's, in reality for right now, even as a stopgap, we can't continue to put 5, 6, 7 rows of chairs outside the sanctuary until something is done. We need to go, and that's coming out of this book, is we need to do something now, because we're about 2 years behind on doing something. So, not that anybody looks forward to, and that's what the majority of people who understand to go to two services, that's not saying that the majority of people want to. It's just there's not another alternative.
So, I think we're getting a little hung up on, this is a phased project. We're gonna do the phase that makes the most financial sense for phase one. That's not to say that later on we add phase two. So what's phase one gonna be? What is phase two gonna be? We're not throwing it out forever, that we're, maybe phase two is the sanctuary side, and we can afford to do that, what are the priorities, but I don't think it's one or the other. I mean, they're phases.
Yeah, it's not one or the other, it's not, we're definitely doing this, and this is out of the question, you know, you guys are dreamers of a 800-person sanctuary. You know, we're not discounting anybody's opinions, we're just strictly going off the feasibility study and what the factors are in here, of what people said during the interviews, what people did during the surveys. So this is the only fact that we can go off of. You know, if we keep going round and round and keep asking the same question over and over again, we'll never do anything. Because, like I said before, the congregation is never going to agree 100% on anything. You know, we can just go off of what we've done off of Hal's feasibility study. And then we could present it to the congregation can decide. Right?
I'm a new member here, so I wasn't here for the feasibility study. But one question I do have, and I'm wondering if it's been taken into consideration, what is the added cost of a second service for the facility as far as operating pastoral side? What is the added cost? And if that's amortized over 10 years, what is that cost? If we factor that into the capital or the budget, can that be financed to expand the sanctuary? Has that been looked at?
Finance to do the sanctuary expansion?
Yes, there's gonna definitely be some added expense of the second service, but what is that number?
We don't have a definite, this is the number for a second service at this time,
That's something.
because
that
we've never had,
I think that should be looked at, because, you know, it's, if we put that over 10 years, maybe it is on day one.
yeah, I mean, it's just not possible to put a dollar figure to that. I don't think it's an astronomical dollar amount. You know, that would be contingent on, do we do a second service, or do we add on, you know, $1 million, $1.5 million expansion to the sanctuary?
Sure.
It would be hard to do that. So
It's
that's,
interesting to see it, you know, is there a 15-year or a 20-year break even on it? Absolutely, in my opinion, it would make sense to explore that
Mhm.
one. I would love to see if that can be put on paper. I think that would be helpful for all of us.
I think we could do a guesstimate on what it would cost, but until we start doing it, the final numbers,
It's speculation.
yeah, it's all speculation, so. What a second service would cost, it'd be hard to come up with concrete numbers, you know. Sure.
Just one of my opinion, I've been through, in two congregations, that you're gonna do this project, you wanna have the money, because you don't wanna strap the church with a debt, because it becomes a very big burden and limits then your ability to do the ministry that you wanna do. And, you just look long and hard if you just say, okay, you got the match and you're, say 700,000 you make, and you need another 700,000 to do the project you wanna do, but you don't wanna do it half, and then have to tear it all out and do it again and stuff. You look at what that 700,000, you gotta pay that back plus the interest, and it just, you gotta look long and hard on what the load you're gonna put on the church, because a church can do so much more if it does not have a debt load on its shoulders than if you've got a building, because, and like I said, there's been 2 Lutheran churches I've belonged to that took the step, and one had 25% committed, and we're gonna do the 5 million.
And that's why it's not,
And you need to.
and with the percentages, that's why it's not just one group making this decision. It's the entire congregation. Okay, it's not one group leading this and one group saying this is what we're gonna build or anything like that. The entire congregation with the feasibility study and with the 3 votes and everything, the entire congregation has a say in what goes on. So it's not, I don't think anybody here wants to leverage your church's future for Sunday school class.
And if
John?
The campaign would be a 3-year campaign, so you have to assume that the first year, people pay 1/3, okay? Is that $600,000 match for the 3-year commitment, or is it only for but people will contribute that first year and then they'll match.
I'm going off of a communication that was given to me, and unfortunately, that was kind of a question that I had with the communication, and they're unreachable right now, to clarify, so I'm kind of going off of what, I don't wanna misinterpret the communication that I received, so I don't really wanna answer that question for them.
I think it was a little slanted toward the first year.
That's the way that I read it, but I don't wanna misinterpret it. I don't wanna put words in their mouth to do it, you know what I mean? It was a slant for the first year, but the way I think a capital campaign kind of goes is, I mean, you're gonna get 2/3 of it in the first year. And you're gonna know what is committed in that first year, in the first couple months.
I think what's wanting to be avoided is any kind of finance, because if you have a project and you have a promise to cover it, but those 2 years that you're waiting for the money to come in, you're gonna have to finance the project, and then there's some cost for interest.
And if it's possible at all, in all possibilities, we'd love to avoid that. But that is part of the team that works with Hal for the capital campaign. And then the finance team would be involved and everything like that. And when everybody feels that it's time to move forward, that we're comfortable with the capital campaign and we're ready to start putting together renderings and blueprints and everything, that's the second vote. So that is, I mean, if, God willing, we have $3 million donated in the first year. I don't know if we can do that or not, but if that's the case, then we start at the first year, and then we don't have to finance anything. Or if 1 million of that is dedicated over the next 3 years, then we have to approach the congregation and say, are we comfortable with financing it all? You know what I mean? So that it's not, that would be something that we would look at all possibilities at that time and say, do we finance a portion of it? Is there somebody who can, a private financier that could finance a portion of it? All these options are not shut down, but that's kind of at a later what we see what we can initially raise. Does that make sense? Edie?
So Mike, you're talking about financing. So when we first built this building, congregational members were given the opportunity to finance it with notes. And we were paid a fair interest rate. Is that something that is being proposed again?
We're not proposing any of that at this time. That's towards the second vote. So that's not, I can't say, when I say financing, that's all speculation. We're not looking at financing, we're not looking at anything, that's total speculation. Okay, so don't hold me, we're not getting bank quotes or anything right now, we're not searching for any of that.
But would we prioritize getting internal financing
I don't know.
versus external financing?
That would be a decision when the time comes, after the capital campaign, then we would put that out there. So again, when I say, like, these are just all possibilities of how this goes. In a way, if it's a 3-year promise during the capital campaign, that's in a way that's kind of financing. You know, if people are promising that I can give this much over the next 3 years, above and beyond my normal faith promise, in a way that's kind of financing too. You know, so you need to take all that into account during the capital campaign to see what is a believable budget. So, Dan?
So at this point, we're just, the next step on February 11th is to determine, are we gonna look at a capital campaign? And a capital campaign would help us understand what the congregation is telling us as far as our capacity to raise funds. And then from there, a lot of these questions would be answered.
Yep.
But the capital campaign will give us the information that will help us answer a lot of those other financial questions.
That is basically all that we're voting for on February 11th, is do we start a capital campaign? Yes or no? And that's it. We're not making any other promises or any other, basically not making any other promises to to finance, we're not making any promises of this is what the building is going to be, or anything, it's just to start a capital campaign so we can see what our budget is, what our estimated budget is.
And that,
Sorry, go ahead.
All I wanna say is, I understand we have a lot of people who are talented in this congregation, we have seen it over the years and everything. But personally, I would be voting for Hal Johnson because he has experience with this. For the fee of $28,500, if we were to sit here and have other people in the congregation take that over, the majority of people are still working and stuff like that, that takes a lot of time off of their workload if they're sitting here doing this too and everything like that. And that is, $28,500 is less than what someone's gonna be making in the course of a year. And so to me, that is some pretty cheap help to have on board to keep us moving. And those people who feel like they are in a position where they could help, then that gives them more time to help Hal and get everything moving in that. So I would vote for keeping Hal's involved in the whole thing.
And the people that can be involved in a capital campaign that want to be involved in it, they're still gonna be asked to help Hal.
Right.
Any other class?
Not to push us out too long, I don't know exactly, Nicole, what you were getting at as far as like the talented people in our congregation, but I mean, I know we have a lot of builders in our congregation, architects, things like that. Would those talents be utilized in this project, or how? Sorry, I know you guys probably talked about this in the last time you did the building, I just wasn't here for that, so I'm curious how you approach that. You know what I'm asking?
That would be, yeah, but that would be down the road.
Okay.
And everything, and if they wanna volunteer their talents again and everything else, that I'm sure there's going to be a team put together to work with supposedly Norson at this time to put forth another set of renderings, a more realistic set of renderings, or basic plans, and then the third vote would be, yep, those are the plans, that's the rendering that we like, let's start going and architectural plans and go forward with that. But that's down the road, so. And if people have talents, there's always an area that there's going to be a fit for them in this wheel. Andy, did you have one real quick, an additional one?
no, I think that, this was to clarify what Dan was saying. The vote is basically also to engage Hal, the 28
Mhm.
fee. That's really the big vote. I guess my only two comments would be a matter of is that, if it's voted no, then what? Then we don't, then we're done, even if
We can reapproach it
reapproach it.
at a later date, I don't,
Okay, no, I just want to make sure everybody understands, if we vote no on, then it's basically, there's not a second option, basically.
well, the second option would be to do it in-house
Yeah.
maybe, but that's,
Sure. So that would be a matter that we'd have to incorporate a team of people that are willing to do this, potentially, to do a capital campaign. The only other comment I had was that, is in just going from what we've done in the past, and I know this is a different system, is that I would love to see a more realistic plan of what we're looking to achieve, that we all agree upon, that then we decide to spend $28,000 to do a capital campaign. That's my 2 cents.
but we have an overall guesstimated goal on what we'd like to achieve, and that's right around the 1.5 million mark. That would be if we do that, then that's a great start on kind of something similar to what the rendering is. You know what I mean? So there's an ultimate goal of what we'd like to. Now, whether or not that's realistic or anything, I mean, if people don't think that we can even raise $1 million, then obviously they should probably vote no. Because that doesn't give us a start on anything. So that would be, according to the rendering, and getting other views, not just Norson, that's a realistic number that we can either upgrade or downsize the rendering to fit. So it's hard to, with this process, with the wheel and everything, it's hard to say this is, I not discounting what happened before, but the congregation is a different size now. And with different responsibilities and different accountability than it was 10 years ago. And that's a great problem,
Yep.
you know.
I had a very bad and I don't. Learned all about it. After I did the interview, and it was a much different attitude than the night I came to the meeting here. And asked some questions and stuff. And I told him to his face, I saw the devil in your eyes when you were answering the questions. So I did not appreciate when he came back at me with my questions. Well, and I was very so that's just my opinion. And I want to and I don't support what comes up with and stuff. But I just, like I said, I was in two churches. I didn't think it was really so you can't do that. You had 25% committed and 5 million. You can't do that. See, this gentleman right here from Wilbur, yeah. I'm not Wilbur, I'm a seal. Right. I am. I'm gonna show you.
Yeah, no, it's just, the thing that I look at about it is that, I think, what I like to watch a big deal is when you go to work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that. Stuff like that. And so,
Right.
I think it's gonna make this idea. And that, if I was doing it, that's what I would hear, I would draw something with one service, I would come along, someday down the line, when services are still, less, right.